welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Tonight I'm joined by co-host Emily Volpintesta, and we have a guest, Ben Roberts, who's been involved in the Coffee Party movement. Now, you may recall that the Coffee Party movement is a response to the Tea Party movement. Emily, you had a question for Ben?
Yes, Ben. We understand that the Tea Party is in reference to the beginning of the American Revolution in 1773, as you said. But why the name, the coffee movement? Why not another name, orange juice? I don't know.
Well, first, the thing you have to understand about this new Coffee Party movement, Emily, is that it really arose by accident. Nobody sat down and said, "Oh, let's form something new,"
Right.
you know, to counter the Tea Party or to oppose it in some way. All that happened is that a woman named Annabelle Park, who had worked for the Obama campaign as a volunteer and made some videos and things like that, and I don't know her, but I have talked to her a few times, that she posted a rant on her Facebook page, basically saying, I wish there was some party I could go to other than a Tea Party, coffee, Red Bull, cappuccino, whatever, anything. And it went viral. Her friends all responded, their friends responded. So then they created a page on Facebook called Join the Coffee Party Movement USA. And that page now, that was created somewhere around the end of January, beginning of February. That page now has, last I looked, over 160,000 members. It's probably higher than that because that was a couple of days ago. That's more than the Democratic Party's pages, the Republican Party's pages, the Tea Party organization's pages. It's the biggest political gathering in one place on Facebook. So nobody sat down and said, strategically, what should we do here?
Right.
Now, there's also an interesting story. You bring up the American Revolution. And Annabelle, I heard her talking about this in an interview on CNN or something like that. She's been the most public face of the movement. Apparently, after the men threw tea into the waters of Boston Harbor in 1773, the women of Boston got together and decided to boycott tea altogether and drink coffee instead. And so coffee became the national beverage of the United States fairly early on, and particularly in Boston. And not only that, there's a great letter that Abigail Adams wrote to, I guess, to her husband John about this. And she describes an event that took place a few years later, 1777, where the women actually broke into the warehouse, a locked warehouse that she called it an eminent stingy merchant, had all this coffee locked up and was withholding it from people. And the women literally broke in and took the coffee, and the men of Boston just stood by aghast and amazed as this happened. So it's kind of a metaphor that I think is apt for the Coffee Party, in that the initial Tea Party was a protest of angry outrage. It was sort of destructive and just lashing out because things weren't right. Their government wasn't representing them. The women come along and do something positive and constructive. They say, let's take cooperative, collaborative, collective action and do something. And so I think that's sort of the spirit of what's happening with the Coffee Party. Now that said, again, the name is an accident, and there's been a lot of discussion within the people that have joined this movement about the name and about what our relationship is with the Tea Party. So we can talk about that further, but maybe you have another question.
So where the Tea Party movement is an angry backlash against politics in general, against career politicians and things of that nature, it's a backlash. It sounds like the Coffee Party movement is a little bit more carefully thought out, maybe have people that have the same gripe against government but are looking for a little bit more constructive way of dealing with it?
I think that's fair to say, although, again, carefully thought out, no. This movement is spontaneously erupting, again, more or less by accident. There's a small group of people that are trying to form and guide it and have done a wonderful job of taking it to the next level, getting people to set up meetings around the country. So last Saturday, over 390 individual Coffee Party groups met, including one that I organized.
One that you organized, absolutely.
At the lovely Mocha Coffee House in Sandy Hook, off exit 10.
Let's put a good word for Mocha.
Absolutely. It's a great place. But getting back to your question, which is now slipping out of my mind a little bit. Oh, yeah, in contrast, the thing that they suggested, they came up with a mission statement that was part of the initial Facebook page that basically said government shouldn't be seen as the enemy. It should be seen as an expression of the will of the people if it's working right. And it's not right now. That is their goal. Is not to say that government, that the best thing is to not have government or to have as little government as possible, or that government is somehow evil, but rather that government needs to serve us and needs to listen to us. And the other piece to it that I think really was an attempt to distinguish themselves and contrast themselves with much of what the media shows you about the Tea Party anyway, is this idea of civil, respectful dialogue. That what they want people to do is come together. People of all opinions, of all political persuasions, sit down over a cup of coffee and talk about what is going on for you, what your opinions are, what your feelings are, what you're motivated by, what change you want to see. And rather than angry protests, rather than putting Hitler mustaches on people and threatening to bring guns, but loaded guns next time, that we take a civil and respectful approach, and that's how we can really create change.
So not from the Coffee Party movement's perspective per se, because obviously there are 166,000 different perspectives there, but your own personal perspective, what function does government play? How does government best serve we the people?
Well, I consider myself a liberal / progressive, and to be fair, the core group of people that are trying to organize this movement also do, but again, they want the movement. They've stated quite clearly they want the movement to embrace anybody that wants to come in and express their views. And I like the way you asked me my personal opinion, because I don't really think the movement as a whole can have an opinion yet. We've just started.
No mantra?
Well, we've just started talking to one another. So even my little group in Mocha had 50 plus people, and there were Republican libertarians there. There were conservatives progressives like me there. There were people all across the spectrum. So even as groups, we don't know collectively what we can find common ground on, let alone as a movement as a whole. But if you want to get into my personal views, they would follow a lot of what you might hear from some of your other more typical liberal and progressive guests. I think that government has some very important roles to play in making in providing certain services that are common goods that we all benefit from, in regulating the marketplace to make sure that it really that you don't have monopolistic powers, that external costs like pollution are internalized into the market, a whole range of different functions. But that, again, is my personal view.
You had a question about the grassroots nature of it?
I was just going to say that this movement might seem more attractive to some because it is grassroots. They might feel more empowered as ordinary individuals, and it's not just the higher-ups talking down to us. People feel that it's more a movement they can get involved in and have some sort of power.
You hit the nail on the head when you said empowered. I mean, to me, that's what the driving energy, and there's enormous energy behind this. I mean, look at how fast it grew. It's because people don't feel empowered. They don't feel like the government is a reflection of their will. They want to be empowered. They've seen the Tea Partiers up there, having national influence, influencing elections like the Brown election in Massachusetts, for example. In other cases they haven't been as successful, but they've created a national presence, and there's this sense that we want to have a voice. We want our voices to be heard. Right. So there's no question that I think is driving people. I saw it a lot at our meeting last Saturday. Right. Frustration with just not knowing how to make a difference.
You mentioned that there were actually some people that had been to Tea Parties who attended the meeting on Saturday.
Oh, well, not my particular meeting. There were some, somewhat conservative-leaning people there, not necessarily Tea Parties, but there certainly have been people who've been a part of the Tea Party movement who have been on the discussion forums on the USA, coffeepartyusa.com website, who have said that they are interested in being part of the Coffee Party movement if the Coffee Party movement is interested in allowing a broad airing of views. So they're there. Now, there are also some that have suggested they view this as a progressive thing. They view it as some kind of front for the Obama administration even. That's been suggested. I mean, quite clearly he's not, regardless of whatever connections do or don't exist in this tiny group of people that have set it all in motion. What's going on is out in the country.
Are there any high-level people from Obama's administration that have been involved in organizing this?
No, I mean, I don't know all the people that are involved in organizing it, but I have absolutely no indication of that whatsoever. I mean, people that have had, volunteered for the campaign, I don't. Again,
well, there's a lot of them, obviously.
Well, sure, including people, that are part of the movement. But the notion that this is somehow a calculated attempt on the part of some, progressive organization, to craft this movement from the top down, that there's any kind of substantial money flowing into it from people like George Soros, I think that's quite silly. They're operating on a shoestring budget, and really the work is being done right now mostly at the group levels. What I hope to see, this is all just evolving, but I hope to see the groups really become, this is about modeling democracy. Okay. So I want to see the groups themselves become the voice of the movement, and that we have a mechanism for us collectively to decide where's the common ground, what do we want this movement to be, what do we want to stand for, how can we drive change. And it comes from the groups, not from the national group. The national group is, has done a wonderful job of giving us the tools to get these meetings up. I was able to post that my meeting was going to be happening, and 30 people signed up to come to it who I didn't know at all. I had my own network, so we had maybe 60 people crammed into Little Mocha last Saturday, the 13th.
Wow.
But building that larger network, that's what I see the national group as really, that's what I would like their role to be. What they want to do is up to them, but they're so far they've really said the right things in that sense, that they want to empower people and bring people together to talk. They don't want to dictate.
We spent a lot of time over the summer talking about the idea about people from different political persuasions finding common ground. Matter of fact, I had a show with my dear friend Billy Michael, who's a libertarian, and the show we ended up calling "Finding Common Ground." And it sounds like you're going to find a lot of areas of agreement. You set aside the stuff that you don't agree on. There's going to be some people that show up that are going to disagree about certain things, and you just can't talk about those things. But it sounds like there's going to be a lot of discussion that goes on within the coffee group that's going to be finding things that's agreeable to everybody and forging ahead and working on those things.
Well, that's certainly what a lot of people have started out to do. And in a way, there's kind of a tension in among the people that have been attracted to this initially, where a lot of them want to do just that. They want to have conversations, even with the people they're not going to find common ground with, to just say, hey, you're a human being and I'm a human being. Let's be respectful and empathic, rather than yelling at each other. Because even if we're not going to agree, that just doesn't do us any good. Ultimately, we're all in this together. But even if we could find some broad agreement on some issues, that essentially 70%, 80% of the country might be able to get behind, and then we publicly stand for that, and that could be incredibly powerful.
Oh, I'm loving this. This sounds great because that's what we talk about at the show a lot, about how we agree. Everybody agrees on like 85% of everything, and there's just certain.
I don't know, and we don't know, and that's part of, I think, what's exciting about this experiment. Now that
each other,
and seeing if that really exists, and we can talk in a second about where I think that might be, or at least one area. But I would note that, as I said, there's this tension. There are definitely people who've come into this movement who just want to act, and they want to go to where the Tea Partiers are, and they want to counter protests, and they want to fight for health care reform, and a whole range of things, and they feel like it would not be good. It slows us down. That it distracts you if you're from a progressive side of the fence to try to find too much unity or even common ground. So there is a tension there, and I don't think it's been fully clarified. Most of what you hear, even at the national level, what they're saying is you get some mixed messages. They say that they want to go for the common ground, but they're posting articles from Daily Kos and The Nation and things of that sort. So they're showing that where their political sentiments lie, even if they're telling us, we want this to be a big tent. So it's all evolving, but I think the common ground side is where we're headed. I certainly hope so, and certainly that's where I think my group is going to focus.
Where do you see the group going?
Well, the issue, picking up on this common ground theme, I think if we're going to have an impact, being just another progressive movement doesn't get us very far. We've got a bunch of those. We've got, Obama's OFA, there's Move On, there's whatever. There's a lot of stuff out there. So, but this idea of finding common ground, of getting into dialogue with people that we normally think of as on the other side, people that normally when we try to talk to, we get into a shouting match with, rather than a conversation, that to me I think is really what this movement could add. And the area that I believe has the greatest potential is this whole notion of trying to reduce dramatically the influence of special interests on the political system. So, right now they're the ones that the government listens to, not the people. Whether it's corporations or lobbyists, if you're on the right, you're going to identify unions and left-leaning PACs and people like George Soros. But really, it all fits together in the sense that moneyed groups are drowning out the voice of the people. I mean, you could argue about whether unions are, they're the voice of a set of people, certainly more than a corporate PAC might be. That's a more narrow interest. But setting all that aside, I think there could be broad agreement that, for example, we might want a constitutional amendment to overturn the effects of the Citizens United decision that the Supreme Court just handed down, allowing corporations to spend freely from their corporate treasuries on political advertising, political speech. And that's set to just do incredible damage to our political discourse. And I think there could be agreement, both on the right and the left on that, and the Coffee Party movement might be able to be a vehicle for finding that.
How?
How?
Yeah.
Well, it starts with sitting down together over a cup of coffee and being civil and respectful and listening to one another. Right. And just asking the question, is there anything we agree on here? Right. If we're shouting at one another, we can't even get to that point. There's an interesting story, I have everybody's got this, I think, or a lot of people, has someone in their family, who you can't talk politics with, right? You have a rule.
Dad always told me.
Don't we all?
Never discuss
Thanksgiving's
politics
coming along. Do not mention climate change
religion.
to, Roger. Right? Well,
so we all have a Roger.
Okay, so we have literally a Roger, and Roger and I have had many exciting shouting matches at family events. And a few years ago, we were told we had to stop, so we just haven't talked politics. Well, when I got involved in this Coffee Party thing, I wanted to write a kind of a manifesto. I got inspired, and I came up with this idea for what I call the Declaration of Inspiration for the Coffee Party movement of the United States of America. And I wanted it to speak to anybody and everybody, and I needed a conservative, a real hardcore right-wing conservative, Fox News watching, Glenn Beck loving, you name it, and I didn't want. I knew I wasn't supposed to talk to Roger, so I tried everybody else, and I was in a hurry. Nobody else was getting back to me. I'm like, well, I gotta call Roger. I
tried it, huh?
So I get on the phone with Roger. This is amazing, though, and I email him the thing, and he reads it, and he calls me back. And he understands that what I want him to do is not get into a political argument with me, but just tell me, is there anything in here that's turning you off, that you have a problem with? And there were 3 or 4 things. And because I'm coming from a progressive frame, as George Lakoff would say, I view things with a certain lens. Language means certain things to me that it doesn't mean to him. He'll see the word collective, and he thinks communist. I don't think that. I didn't know that was a buzzword. But he made me change that to, I just think I took it out, or I put collaborative, I don't know. So there were a few points like that. So we worked together.
Excellent.
We collaborated, and it was fun. And he kept trying to bait me and get me into political arguments, and I didn't care. I didn't want to argue back because I wanted to fix this piece and make it something that he was happy with. I knew how I could phrase it so I would be happy with it and people who thought like me. So here's the really cool part, though, right? We get through with that, and we do it. And then he's still trying to get me into political discussion. I'm like, all right, I'll go with you for 5 minutes. What about campaign finance, Roger? What about this money in politics thing? Does that bother you too? Yeah, that really bothers me. All that union money, all that PAC money coming from George Soros. Well, within a short bit of conversation, we both agreed we could support a constitutional amendment that limited campaign financing solely to contributions from individuals.
Beautiful.
And it was easy. We didn't shout. We didn't feel like shouting. We never were able to try that before because we hadn't come together where the underlying premise is to collaborate, to cooperate, to have a common purpose. And that's really what's behind the coffee party movement idea. So
we had the same thing with Emily and I sat down with Jeff Thomas, who directs the show, and Mike McLaughlin, State Senator Mike McLaughlin, and we had kind of that same kind of discussion where we were using different words. As an aside to the audience, George Lakoff, of course, talks about framing issues. You want to frame them in a way that best put forward what you mean to say. You try to stay away from buzzwords and things of that nature.
You need to be aware. I mean, he's a professor of cognitive sciences at Berkeley, so he studies the brain and how we literally form ideas and opinions. And what he's come to realize is that the right is really good at using language that activates the conservative, networks in our in our brains, and we all have them. We all have conservative networks, and we have liberal networks. The left, on the other hand, is terrible at doing this. The language we use either doesn't activate our liberal thinking, or it activates the conservative thinking. I mean, that's one of the objections people have to the coffee party name that you brought up in the beginning. That when you hear coffee party, you immediately think Tea Party.
Right.
Well, is that what you want? If your goal is to be anti-Tea Party, then no, you don't. It's like the book Lakoff originally wrote, Don't Think of an Elephant. Well, as soon as you hear that, you think of an elephant, right?
Yeah.
So that, depending on what your purpose is, certain language will work for you or it won't. And that's what Lakoff, who I actually played phone tag with over this Declaration of Inspiration that I was writing, and talked to some other people in his circle. It's been a fascinating journey. But that's his key insight. So going back to what you're saying, the language we choose is incredibly important depending on the purpose we have. And
you found that moment with Roger where you could find the language that both of you felt comfortable with and neither of you felt uncomfortable with. Because Emily and Jeff and I had that same type of thing. We were framing the discussion about Walmart and big box stores, and we managed to get the buzzwords out and find a common ground in terms of how we talked about the subject. And we found ourselves agreeing about a lot of things. Different perspectives. Mike had a different perspective on his thinking about what's wrong with big box stores was a little different than ours, but it wasn't dramatically different. It was just a little bit different.
Now, I was going to say it's interesting that this coffee party was started by women, a woman's Facebook page, and it seems more of a communicative movement when often in history I think of the Tea Party as being more violent and people, with axes and chopping up things. I mean, do you think this is more of a peaceful kind of movement? I always associate Tea Party being more kind of violent, so maybe that would be more attractive to people.
We talk about Lakoff's ideas. The conservative frame in his mind is based on the strict father model of how a family works, and we apply that model, specifically the father, because the mother can't protect you from the evil world out there, and she can't discipline you so that you learn how to behave and know right from wrong, because we're born, not knowing, born basically, ignorant of how to behave, and we don't have the right instincts. They need to be hammered into us by a strict father. The opposite, the liberal frame in our minds, the liberal networks and way of thinking, that's the nurturing parent model. So it's women as well as men, but really I think the mother, the mothering concept is probably dominant in that. And I think that spirit is very much there in what we're doing.
Isn't America more of a patriarchal kind of society, whereas by contrast, Europeans, and you've been in Italy for 8 years, so you've seen it, European societies are more matriarchal, where the mother kind of dominates the family structure?
It's possible. I mean, you think of Italian mothers, Jewish mothers. Of course, we have them here in the United States too. So I can't speak to that in terms of our families or our society. And again, what Lakoff says is we all have both of these things. We use them in different parts of our lives. So you might have the liberal progressive frame activated in your progressive world, but you might run your business like a strict father and be very hierarchical and authoritarian. That's why the language you use is so important. Even if I'm progressive, if somebody uses conservative language in talking to me, I start thinking like a conservative. As you said, we want to find, in some sense, we want to find language that brings us all together. But if we can find language that brings us all together, but also fires both sides, because I think you do need them both. It's not to say that there isn't a place for authority and hierarchy, but one of the interesting things I'm getting into, and that got me so excited about this movement, is I think that's less necessary in a lot of ways. It has a lot to do with the way that we're socially networked now, the way that groups like the Coffee Party movement can come into being really without a whole lot of structure and top-down direction. If you just facilitate it, we have the way to get the word out, and then people just do it. These forums have been going on for a month now with just millions of words being exchanged between people. Nobody made that happen. People want to talk. They want to share. They want to join as a network and as a group, and there's tremendous power and intelligence in that, and it's not hierarchical. Hierarchy squashes that.
Right.
So you want something more like what you do on Monday evening with the discussion group, where you're the moderator and you don't control anything. You just sort of, you have all these people that are rowing this ship or rowing this boat, and really all you're doing is you're the kind of you're just tilting the wheel a little bit this way or that way, so the discussion stays on course. Is that what you're talking about in terms of these groups?
Yeah, and I mean, I brought in. There's a whole movement called co-intelligence. I know movement may not be the right word, a field, if you will. And I brought in a practitioner or somebody who understands this phenomenon. But what it basically says is a group is much more intelligent than any individual when it works as a group, when it's in a collaborative mode. And so I brought in a woman who facilitated what's known as a World Cafe. And we can talk more about that at some point if we have time. Or you can go to co-intelligence.org and read about it. But that speaks very much to what you're saying.
Good question?
Well, we'll see. One question I had is that, I think that this movement might be more attractive, even to, we've seen so far that wars and fighting doesn't really accomplish anything. So I think that this might be more attractive to people thinking, they always said if a woman was president that we would be, discussing things more. So I'm thinking this is maybe the wave of the future, Maybe we're seeing that talking things and settling things in a more peaceful way is the way of the future. We now know that fighting isn't accomplishing anything. So.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, Nisi Mar was at the meeting last Saturday, who's trying to support the Department of Peace.
Okay. Yep, she's been on the show. Yep.
And in fact, I have a nice shot up on our Coffee Party movement, or what is it? Mocha Coffee Party is the Facebook page that I have, and there's some shots of some of the work we did, including a little write-up she did on one of the tables. We had the tables covered in paper, and she wrote out a whole.
Ow.
We actually did 2 shows about that, talking about the Department of Peace, which we're going to actually do another show coming up. Oh, we're wrapping it up? Okay. This has been Progressive Soup. This is David Stevenson, Emily Volpintesta, co-host, and Ben. Okay. Good evening. What happened to the 30-second warning?
Yeah.